Developers, the wizards that shape your company like nobody else. Their code helps build your products, develop systems, and keeps your entire technology infrastructure from falling apart. But hiring the right developers is a tricky task. You receive a lot of applications, but you only want the best. So how do you identify the best developers without spending a lot of valuable time on the wrong candidates? Introducing HackerEarth's technical recruitment software, a platform that helps you hire the best developers by using online tests to assess your applicants. Here's how it works. With HackerEarth, you can invite candidates to remotely appear for customized coding tests for any technical role. And once they take your tests, you can access detailed performance reports to decide who makes it through to the next rounds. Auto-generate highly customized tests for any technical role, even if you're not a developer yourself. Access our library of more than 15,000 inbuilt questions, or add and use your own. With over 35 programming languages supported, you can receive submissions in the language of your choice. The system magically evaluates the code submissions based on multiple parameters. And you get detailed reports on each candidate's performance. Copying or using any unfair means on a test is impossible, thanks to our proctoring measures and plagiarism detection techniques. HackerEarth helps you optimize your tech hiring process by scaling your hiring efforts, improving your accuracy, and reducing your time to hire. Tech recruiters use HackerEarth for a variety of requirements, identifying the right candidates during lateral hiring, scaling their university recruitment efforts, and aiding workplace diversity through blind hiring. More than 500 companies globally use HackerEarth to assess developers. Now, it's your turn to transform your hiring process. Register for a free trial today and try HackerEarth now.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar on recruiting Gen Z versus recruiting millennials, a whole new ballgame. I'm super excited to have William Tincup, the president at RecruitingDaily, as a host for the webinar. And I will be driving the webinar along with William, and I'm really excited to have all of you today on the webinar. So that will be the agenda. So this will be the agenda for today's webinar. I'll start with a quick introduction to William. Then we'll talk about what is HackerEarth. Then I'm going to hand over the presentation to William to talk about how recruiting Gen Z is different from any other past generation. Towards the end, in between, we are open to questions. So please feel free to put in any questions, and as and when we can take them up, we will take them up. William is president of RecruitingDaily, and he sits at the intersection of HR and technology. He's a writer, speaker, advisor, consultant, investor, storyteller, and most of all, a teacher. He's written over 200 HR articles, spoken at over 300 HR and recruiting conferences, and conducted over 1,200 HR podcasts and webinars. He also sits on the board of advisors or board of directors for 20 HR technology startups. Needless to say, William is a thought leader in space of HR and has some very interesting points around how technology is intersecting with HR today and how we can make the whole process a lot better. A quick introduction about us. HackerEarth, we are a 6-year-old organization, serving across 500 customers globally, a team of 140 people located across US, India, China, Japan. And we provide, as you saw in the video, we provide a skill assessment software to organizations that allow them to technically assess developers through coding challenges. Probably towards the end, if time permits, I would want to discuss about how the use of technical assessment platform like ours is more suited towards recruiting Gen Z audience, and why and how companies can leverage such technologies to not only have a more seamless recruiting process, but also to provide a much better candidate experience to the candidates in the recruiting process. So the process flow for using a product is fairly straightforward. Using skills, you automatically create tests. You invite your candidates to take the test remotely at their own convenience. They could do it from sitting from their homes. Then you go through once they've taken up these tests, you go through the detailed reports, and then you could always you can also use a remote interviewing software to run for initial phone screens or before you call them in for an in-person interview. A little bit about what is the problem that we're trying to solve. So if you look at the technical recruiting funnel, there are 4 key stages. Sourcing, where you identify candidates from various channels. Screening, where you typically, so traditional sources have been to do resume-based keyword screening to identify which might be the right candidates for your recruiting process, then taking these candidates to the next stage of interviewing, and then eventually hiring them. Now, if I look at the stage of screening, there are a bunch of challenges that any recruiter is facing today. The process of keyword screening is tedious. It does not scale as your volume of resumes go up. Obviously, it's highly time consuming. And I think most importantly, or the points that is of most concern, is that the accuracy in resume screening, the error rate could be higher. So there are significant chances of having false positives in your interviewing process, meaning candidates who appear to be good on their resume didn't really pan out in terms of their actual skills. And even the cost, and I would say the cost of false negative is even higher. You don't want to miss out on candidates who are actually good. So having an effective process in the screening stage can actually help you ensure that you're getting right candidates into your funnel. And then, of course, interviewing. If there's anything that can help you interview using lesser time of your hiring managers, that's welcome any day, because at the end of the day, the hiring manager should be doing what they're supposed to do, and that's write code, and not spend hours and hours in interviewing candidates. So essentially, the solution that we provide kind of sits in across both of these stages, helping you make your screening a lot more relevant, a lot more skill-based, while ensuring you also spend lesser time on interviewing candidates and focus on the better candidates. I think this was kind of covered in the video that was played in the beginning, but some of the key features are a vast library of content, allowing candidates to take tests from their own convenience at their homes, so remote proctoring, detailed analytics and reports for the hiring managers, and a completely automated end-to-end technical assessment process. These are some of the customers that we work with. And with this, I'll hand over the presentation to William to talk about the topic that all of you have come in here to listen to. Over to you, William.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming today. And one of the things I would tell you that as I did the demo of HackerEarth this past week, I did it a couple of years ago and kind of forgotten how good it was. But one of the things that I really like about the platform is it rids fraud from the system, or inefficiency from the system, which they talked about, but also fraud. How do you know that that person is taking the test, etc.? How do you make sure that they're not copying and paste from other places? It's really wonderful, and you should definitely do a demo, because I was kind of blown away from the demo that I did, and I do a lot of demos. So I would definitely do that. So anyhow, we're going to talk today a little bit about Gen Z and millennials. And, I like to always start off with, every generation is, the same, and every generation has some kind of nuances that are interesting. And I think as we go through the presentation today, you'll find some nuances. And again, I don't want to play up all the, I don't want to play up like, oh my God, they're so different. Well, they are. I mean, I'm Gen X, and I'm definitely different than my father's generation of boomers. And they, as we found out with millennials, when we were recruiting millennials pretty aggressively, that we're indeed different. And we're going to find that as well with Gen Z. So I look forward to the presentation. Arbaz, it looks like you're going to have to advance the slides. Thanks, brother. Sorry about that. Okay, so today we're going to talk a little bit about millennials, a little bit about Gen Z, the differences, which I think will be interesting for you, some of the takeaways, some of the things that you can action, and then Q&A. It's been mentioned probably 5 different times so far, but really webinars are just a great place to listen and learn, but they're also a great place in case you have specific questions from either things that I've said or things that you've heard, or questions that you're already seeing in the marketplace, and you just want to kind of get those questions heard. Because if you have the question, chances are, we've got 1,000 people registered for the webinar. So I mean, if you've got the question, chances are somebody else has that same question. So please do us the honor and ask the question. All righty, next slide. Okay, so when we think of millennials, one of the things we need to do is get a baseline for our understanding of what is and what isn't a millennial, and let's put a time frame on that. And this might shock you to learn that the oldest millennial is 38 years old, right? That's the birth of 80 to 95. The youngest millennial is 23. So think of that, and go ahead and start kind of framing that in your mind. 38 to 23 is a millennial, and you might have had that different in your mind, but let's just use that as our baseline for today's presentation. Next slide. So these are the things that kind of we've learned over the last 15 years of recruiting millennials is, transparency. They actually care about it. More than us just talking about it, they actually care about it. They really do want to know about what's going on with the company, where they're out in the process, where they're going in their career, things like that. So brutal feedback, it's not just actionable and honest feedback, but it's really, you're not doing a good job here, or you're doing a great job here, and here's why. So brutal can be both positive and negative, and solicited and unsolicited, but they do consume feedback in a way that previous generations might not have. I'll give you a story about myself. I'm not a feedback person, insofar as the only feedback that I really like and respect is unsolicited or solicited negative feedback. So feedback can only come in kind of 4 ways. It can either be positive or negative, solicited or unsolicited, and that's it. That's the entire world of feedback. Well, I only really like solicited negative feedback. So positive feedback, either solicited or unsolicited, just goes through one ear and through the other for me. And so I think we're all different in this way. So you almost have to kind of know what type of feedback you like, and also what your team responds to. But with millennials, they do like feedback, and I would say that if I were really being honest with myself, they like positive feedback more than negative feedback. But they do like feedback. All right, career pathing is the concept of when they first come in, they want to know, either with your company or others, where they're going next. They want to know that. And they might even ask that question in the interview process, like, this is great, where am I going next? Training, they want to know, I'm coming in, with this level of training, I want to learn certain things. I want to learn, maybe it's a different developer language. Maybe they're a UI developer and they want to learn something else. And so the thing is like starting that in recruiting, once we source the candidate, once we start really having an honest discussion with them, is learning what they want to learn. Like, okay, let's be honest, you came in here, what would you like to learn? Like, while you're with us, we want the best version of you while you're here. Again, not dealing with whether or not you're going to be here for 6 years, 6 months, 6 days. We want the best version of you while you're here. What do you want to learn? Praise. In the old world, or kind of previous generations, we'd call that recognition, or we would call that rewards and recognition. And really what it is praise. When they do something good, millennials generally know that they've done something good, and they'd like for people, both their peers subordinates and the higher ups, they want people to give them a pat on the back, and that could be public or private, but they want acknowledgement, and praise is a good word for that, because I think that's what they really seek, without telling us or even with telling us, is they want to be acknowledged when they've done something really good. And again, I don't think that's unfair. I think we probably all want that. So the last thing is texting beating email. You know, I talked to a candidate the other day who writes split in the millennial group, and I asked him about email, and he's like, "Man, I hate email, capital H, hate email." And I was like, well, why do you hate it so much? He's like, you know, it's just if somebody wants to get in touch with me and I want to have some type of conversation with them, then I want to text with them. I don't want this big, long, drawn, you know, thing with going back and forth and reply all and all this other stuff. And so, you know, I think we've learned that as recruiters. I think this is not new. I think that's why companies like you know, Canvas and TextRecruit and some of these other great text recruiting platforms are out there, is because we've learned that if we really want to reach this group, this millennial group, we've got to text them. We've got to give them the job ops, you know, via text, and introduce ourselves via text. So these are just kind of the general recruiting principles for millennials. And so we laid a baseline down of these are the things that we already kind of know. Again, they're 38 to 23. These are things that we've learned through some very painful experiences of trying to get them to do it maybe an older way or a different way. But this is what sticks when you're recruiting millennials. These 6 things you should, you know, have them tacked to the wall and make sure that you're, you know, adhering to kind of what matters to them. All righty, next slide. All right, so let's go into each of these real quick. So transparency and feedback. Transparency, you know, they want to know the job, the hiring manager, the team, the company, the CEO, where they're in the recruiting process. Like, you can't overwhelm them with too much transparency. Okay. In fact, they'll tell you, if like, okay, yeah, I got it. Like, you know, that's their signal for, okay, you know, you're being transparent enough, I trust you. But you know, until you get that signal from them, keep giving them more transparency. You just went through an interview with a group. Now you'll interview with the department manager. Then you're going to interview with, if that goes well, you'll interview with the executive over the team. Then you'll interview with the CEO. You know, again, the more transparency you lay out for them insofar as where they are at in the process, the better. The better for them, the better for you. So transparency, I would look at it and say, you can't kill them with transparency. And they'll tell you, they'll signal to you if and when they feel like they've got enough transparency. Training, you know, this is one of the deals about the training and development and learning and development. These are things that we typically talk about after they're employees. So after the onboarding process, maybe even after a year or so that they've been there, we start to kind of talk about training. What I would suggest to you is let's bring that all the way up into the recruiting process and talk to them openly about training and development, skills development, skilling up, you know, all of those things. Let's not wait. In fact, the way that I would do that is I would open the dialogue with them very early on when we feel like we like them as a candidate, and talk openly about, what do you want to learn? You know, just give me an idea of what you would like to learn. Let's rank 3 things. You know, it could Python, JSON, whatever the bit is that they want to learn. And then once we go through the offer, they accept the job. In onboarding, I would validate, hey, you know, back when we were, you know, recruiting you, you said that you wanted to learn these things. Is that still true? Is that still, you know, we still feel the same way? Good. So we've got you on this training course, and over the next 6 weeks, you're going to go through this training course. You're going to get certified, and you're going to test out, and you're going to learn these things. So now what we've done is we've kind of full circle. We've learned from you what you want to learn. We've validated during onboarding that you wanted to learn those things, and then we put you on a path, a training and development, learning and development, path to learn the things that you want to learn. That's first of all, that's just great strategy to engage and retain top talent, and it aligns with what they care about, which is learning something new. And some of that could be when you're talking to candidates, do you want us to work on your weaknesses? Like you don't know, C++. You've never studied that. It doesn't look like you're that great at it. You want us to work on your weaknesses, and do you want us to kind of fill in where you're weak, or would you rather us work on your strengths? You're intermediate, but not advanced at a particular topic. Do you want us to work on that? I think pushing those conversations out into the recruiting part or into the hiring part is good for them, and it shows that you care, and then fulfill it, and then put them on a training path. Okay, so next.
So, William, a question has come in. 1 year into the role, is training the responsibility of recruiters or a discussion for managers?
Well, here's the thing. If we don't have the discussion, now that's a great question. So whoever asked the question, kudos. Great question. If we don't answer the question about training in recruiting, the candidate moves on. So let me make sure that you understand what I mean by that. They'll ask probative questions like, "Hey, how's your training? You know, I really wanted my last job. I didn't get to learn as much as I thought I would, and I feel I got stuck. I really want to learn X." If we don't engage that discussion in recruiting, that candidate is just going to move on to the next gig. So we can't wait till HR. We can't wait till the hiring manager. We can't wait till somebody else. We've got to engage them with that discussion in recruiting. And we can validate it with the hiring manager. We can validate it in onboarding. We can validate it with HR. But we need to have the discussion in recruiting with that candidate. If we want to keep them in the recruiting funnel, and we want to keep them engaged in that job, then we have to have the discussion with them. Period. End of story. Great question, though.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for the answer.
Sure. Okay, so let's take a look at the praise and texting. So praise, again, this is one of those this idea of we usually wait till we get into the employee and we get them in on some total recognition, some software and programs and process, and it can be public, it can be private, but they want to know your praise strategy. And notice the words that I'm using. Praise strategy, words that you don't normally hear together. They want to know that when they're being recruited. Like, do you give me an example of how you praise people when they do a great job? This is a typical question that a millennial will ask you. It's like, how do you praise people? Like they might use the word praise. They might even use the acknowledgement. How do you acknowledge, or how do you discover when somebody does something well? And what do you do when you find out that someone's excelled at something, etc. So you've got to get there as a recruiter. You got to talk about praise and the system of praise and how it's tied to your values, your ethics and morals, and more to the point, how you go about praise within your firm. Texting, again, every generation kind of likes communication in a little bit different way. But texting is definitely, if you want to recruit millennials, again, that 38 to 25 range. If you're not texting with them, you're already losing candidates that you should be trying, that you should have, and it's only because as a recruiter you're not changing your communication formula to fit the audience. And I'm not trying to beat anybody down or anything. It's just the audience has moved, the audience has changed. The audience wants to be text, and as a recruiter, you either realize that and adapt, or So they want texting, and they don't want a novella or Tolstoy. They want a short, quick. Who are you? What do you want me to look at? Why do you want me to look at it? And what do I do next if I like it? That type of stuff. There's a formula to it for sure, and it's not long. It's decidedly not long. All right, next slide. These are your key questions that every recruiter, every hiring manager is being asked today. And again,
a quick question before you move on. Is it okay? Yeah. So, so the question has come from Sarah Young, and she's asking, what do you text candidates? You may lose context in a text. So I think the question is, if you're talking over emails, the conversation is a lot more structured. There's history, and you can always go back and see what was discussed. And that could be a little difficult to do in text. So how do you maintain that context? And because ultimately it's a recruiting process that you're doing.
Sure. So first of all, texts are just as searchable. So you can always find things that are historic. So you don't have to worry about that. Secondly, it's how they want communication. And so you got to start with the audience wants the communication on their phone or tablet, and they want it in the form of text. And how do you create context? Well, the thing is you create context by telling them who you are, telling them why you're reaching out, telling them what you would like for them to do, click this link, and why you think that they're a good fit for that. And if they look at it and they think they are, that you can set up an appointment to talk further, or schedule an interview or something like that. But basically, there is a formula. It's, again, not an email. And we like emails. We like emails because it contains all this stuff. But it's all that stuff that gets in the way of what they want. And that's the tough part for us, is we've got to adapt, because they're just not going to respond. They've already told us they're not going to respond to email, no matter how well crafted or well conceived the email. They're just not going to respond to it, even if it's in their best interest, which is crazy, but true. And I think that's one of the things you just got to look at and say, okay, well, then let me see if I can get my context down into a tweet, into a very short form, give them a small link, let them go look at the job. And if they're interested, then they're going to go look at it. They'll click on it, they'll look at it, they'll say, oh yeah, this looks really kind of cool. I'd love to talk more about this. And then they'll respond to me. Then we can go into, and then you can have a call. Or then you can have an email conversation or an in-person conversation. And that's where you can go broader and do the things that you want to do, and really you can sell the job and sell the company and the position and all that type of stuff. But initially, they do not want long-form content. And I'll get to why that is here in just a couple seconds. But they want text, and either we provide the text or we don't get the candidates. So it's a real harsh world out there, and they have choices. And so we either communicate to them in the way that they want to be communicated with, or we lose that talent.
Got it. So you're essentially saying text is to kind of initiate a discussion, and then you could take them to the regular process, but
that's exactly right.
In the beginning. Okay.
That's exactly right. Well said. It's like we put another layer on the very front end of this, and just say, hey, we think you would be really great at this. Check this link, and then if you are, we would love to talk with you. And if you're not, no harm, no foul. And so yeah, I think that's a really good way for everyone to think about it. Is it's just one thing on the front that you still want to have a call with them, and you still want to go through some other things in your process, but you need to start with text.
Got it.
And if you're not starting with text, you're already losing candidates. So these three questions in different phraseology, these three questions are the questions that we're all getting asked. What's next? Meaning, millennials ask the question, okay, for 18 months, 9 months, 6 months, whatever, I do this job and I'm great at it. What's after that? Which is inherently an internal mobility career pathing question. If you can't answer, as a recruiter, if you can't answer that question, they move on. They go to the next job. So this is not a question for HR. This is not a question for the hiring manager. This is actually a question for recruiters. And so you have to have an idea of what they'll do next after this job. You've got to have an idea of, okay, here's what you're going to do. And once you're successful at this position, here's what typically happens next. You know, you go from being, you know, a role player to a manager, and from a manager to a team leader, from a team leader to, you know, whatever. But you've got to have an idea of what's next, because if you don't, man, the talent, it's ruthless. They're just going to move on. They'll leave, you know, that interview process and go on to somebody else that kind of gets it and understands that there's got to be a what's next. Two, we talked about it already, but it's important to reiterate. How are you going to develop me? How are you going to make me better? Is usually how it's phrased. Is, you know, they have a sense of how they're good, and they have a sense of where they are in the spectrum. They want to know how you're going to make them better. And again, you can either answer that question or you can't as a recruiter. If you can't, you've lost the talent. They're moving on. This is not a hiring manager. It's not an HR. It's not a learning and development, training and development, leadership development, succession plan. This is a recruiter question. And so you've got to be able to answer it. Last, it's that praise strategy. And I think telling them stories about praise is important. So having a kind of a host of stories in your repertoire of like, hey, you know, when Sally first came in, you know, she was kind of shy and she kind of kept to herself, and we recognized that she, you know, saved the company a ton of money, and she didn't even say anything about it. And you know, we found out, and what we did is we had a party and we took everybody out, went to a baseball game, like, you know, like those anecdotal stories about how we recognize people are very important to millennials. And again, they might not use the word praise, but that's what they mean when they're talking about how do you recognize talent, how do you acknowledge achievements, etc. They're talking about praise. So you might not have a praise strategy per se in your back pocket, which I understand, but having some stories of praise is very important for recruiters. Next slide.
Hey, William, before we move to the next slide, there's still a bunch of questions around texting. So do you want to take that up now or later?
Yeah, no, bring it. Let's go.
Okay, so the first question is from Kimberly. They're asking, what about privacy? If your employer does not provide a cell phone and you want to keep your personal number private, then texting is not really an option.
Well, here's the thing: if you text them and right, if you text them and they don't want to answer you, they won't, or they'll block you. So, but here's the important part: they get to decide. You know, that's up to them. It's just the same as email insofar as people, you know, unsubscribing for your email or hitting spam for your email. It's the same difference. If they don't want your message for whatever reason, then they'll just opt out of your message. But up until that point, that generation wants text. They prefer text over any other communication medium.
Okay. I think the question was more from the point of view of your own number. So as a recruiter, if you're using your personal cell, then there are privacy issues, right?
No. And in a lot of the texting programs, you're using, you know, a number that goes to a desktop actually, and you can set up campaigns that way. But if you're using your phone, recruiters are already using their personal phones and hitting people's personal phones. So I don't buy that. I think that's a cop out for people that don't want to text.
Got it. And another question, which is kind of tactical of sorts. So Tamara is asking if when you're talking about texting, are you talking about the candidates who apply to the role? Because when you're headhunting, the recruiter will not have potential candidate's phone number.
Well, there is sourcing tools out there that can get you phone numbers for candidates, personal cell numbers for candidates. So we can go offline with that, but there's sourcing tools that can get you cell phones, even if they haven't applied. In fact, I would suggest if they haven't applied, those are even better candidates. If you feel like they're good candidates for you and you can find their cell phone, that's a great reach out for me. If they've applied for the job and you have their cell phone, that's great as well. But we start with texting. With this generation, we start with texting, period, end of story. However you get their cell phone, which, by the way, there are several sourcing applications that can help you get their cell phone.
Got it. You can continue.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So the way that they search, and this is going to make sense. They Google the company, they Glassdoor the company, they LinkedIn, and this is important. They LinkedIn. They go and look at former employees. It's really easy to search for former employees, as you well know. And then they reach out to those folks. And they do this, this stalking. They do this before they really even apply. So like if you text them and you send them a job, they'll look at the job and go, hey, that's pretty cool. Well, the first thing they'll do after that is then they're going to do their research. And sometimes that's called stalking, but they're going to do their research. And they're going to find out about the job, the company, the hiring manager, the recruiter. They're going to find out as much as they can before they apply. And they might be texting with you and kind of answering questions and setting up times, but don't think for a minute that they're not doing research on you. They're doing research just as you're doing research on them. Let's be honest. A good recruiter is doing just as much as research on them as they're doing on the position in the company. But that's what's happening. The Google, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and they're really trying to find out what's good and what's bad about the company. In Glassdoor, they're looking for both negative and positive sentiment. If it's all positive, they don't believe it. If it's all negative, they don't believe it. They want a mixture of negative and positive sentiment that's there in a Glassdoor company review. And so, just as we research candidates and go to all ends of the earth to do that, they're doing the same thing about us, which is good. I mean, you want an educated candidate, so it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. All right, next slide. All right, let's talk a little bit about Gen Z. So just so I get a baseline, these are folks that are 23 to 8. So 23, that's college recruiting, that's entry level. So these folks are entering the workforce, have been for a couple years, and they are a bit different. All the way down to 8 years old. There's going to be some really interesting things to talk about with Gen Z. So let's get to the next slide. Okay, digital, visual, entrepreneurial, blurred, individuals. All right, we're gonna go through this a little bit in a little bit more detail, but just to frame this is the first generation, again, 23 to 8, that has never not known the internet. Okay, they've grown up with the internet. The internet has never not been there, unless Facebook's been down or Instagram's been down or something like that. But the internet is generally there, which means that they're accustomed to things like voice computing. Siri can you do this? Alexa, how about that? They're used to touch and swipe computing because they grew up on iPhones and iPads and things like that. So this is a generation, while similar to millennials in some ways, that also very different, very digital. So let's take a look at some of the examples of these things. Next slide. Okay, so these folks can multitask more effectively than all the previous generations combined, and a lot of this comes with the fact that they've grown up with the internet in a way that's different than me, Gen X, and millennials. They've grown up being able to play a video game or watch a YouTube and watch someone else playing a video game while having a conversation with their mother or father. That's normal. And so, that's something that we've got to think about when we're talking to them, like when we're recruiting them. or maybe when they're doing an interview with us or doing a video interviewing, they might actually be looking at the video and answering the questions, and also looking at their phone and, you know, posting something on Instagram, which is discerning on some level, because we're like, well, you know, can you just pay attention to what I'm talking about? And they are paying attention. And if you ask them, like, hey, what did I just say? They'll tell you what you just said. So it'll kind of freak you out a little bit. They actually can multitask. They have strong technical skills. This is important to denote. They have strong technical skills, but not great soft skills, right? So they might not look you in the eye. And for anybody that's got children in this age group, you understand what I'm saying. Like they'll listen to you, they're hearing you, and they're playing, you know, Fortnite or whatever, but they might not make eye contact with you. And that doesn't mean that they don't respect you or don't like you or love you or listening to what you're saying. That's just not important to them. So we have to adapt to that stronger technical skills, because they grew up in a world with the internet and they've had technology in their hands from such a young age, but they might not have some of the softer things, softer skills that we are accustomed to. And so in a work environment, we might have to actually teach them some of the softer skills, which puts a different burden on the organization. You know, okay, they don't mind bots, SMS is normal. So now you go from millennials, where texting is preference, to a generation where, you know, if you don't text, something's wrong with you. like they actually look down on you. Like why would you email me that? What's wrong with you? What went wrong in your childhood where you would email me that and not text me that? They're also accustomed to bots, which is really fascinating. Like they'll be on a website or an app or whatever, and they'll pop up some you know, chatbot, and that's not weird, that's not unusual, that's actually normal. So in our recruiting process, if we've got chatbots that are involved that answer, you know, or AI, you know, machine learning, whatever, that interacts with them, they're not thrown off by that. That's actually kind of normal, and they don't even think about it. My son, my oldest son, Henry, he's 13, and he does his homework with Alexa. So like Alexa is literally sitting about, I don't know, about a foot and a half from where he's doing his homework, and he'll look over, not even look over, he'll just he'll just ask Alexa, you know, Alexa, what's the capital of Ohio? Okay, great, thanks. And he'll go on about his homework, not think twice about it. And all that AI and, you know, chatbot and machine learning and all that stuff that's going on behind it, he doesn't care. All he knows is that he's asking Alexa a question and Alexa's giving him an answer. So this is good for us on some level in the recruiting process as we develop new technologies to interact with candidates. In the candidate experience, this is good for us because we're going to put new technologies, and for the younger generation, Gen Z, they're not going to be thrown off by it at all. Like there's no issues interacting with a chatbot. So that's very, very, very cool. They've downloaded apps from a young age. That's important to us because, you know, if we have a process that's broken, they're accustomed to Xing out of things that they don't like. And so this is yet another kind of a burden that's put on recruiting and hiring managers. Like if they just don't like something, or they feel like it's flawed or it's flaky, or you know, for whatever reason it's not working, they just click out of it. They're done, move on to the next thing. So they're quick to make those types of decisions about people in a process. So I think it's important for us to make sure that we give them what they want and how they want it. And that's asking questions too, making sure that they're happy in what we're talking to them about. So let's talk, you know, let's talk visual. You know, they love Instagram and Snapchat.
one question that was related to research. I didn't want to bring it up because you were in a flow, but Cole is asking regarding research, are there differences with how they approach referrals and word of mouth?
Let's say the last part again, real quick.
So regarding research, so when candidates are doing research on the organization, are there differences with how they approach referrals and versus word of mouth?
I think they treat both referrals and word of mouth with some healthy skepticism. They're still going to do their research. So just because, you know, I say, hey, you should take a look at this job, that's cool. Like on one level, they'll go, that's great. I wouldn't have known it had you not told me about it. That's awesome. They're still going to go through their research though, because they're curious too. So some of this is what's not being said is they're curious animals and they want to know just like we want to know. I mean, it's actually kind of interesting that the candidate is caught up to recruiters in this way. Recruiters have always wanted to know the most that they could possibly know within the limits of the law about a candidate. Now, the candidates want to know, equally know the most that they can know about us. And that's everybody. That's everybody. The people on the team, you know, they want to know everything. Why people left, you know, why people are leaving, why people are, you know, selling stock, you know, they want to know everything. And
right.
So candidates have outflanked us on some level because they don't have laws that they have to adhere to, hiring laws. So whilst recruiters are kind of, in some ways, their hands are kind of, you know, tied on things that they can't do in terms of research, candidates don't have that. They can do whatever the hell they want and will.
Interesting. Okay. And one question from me, you know, talking about bots. So you said that they are open to, you know, receiving communication from bots, but there is an element of, you know, whenever you introduce a bot or an AI-based system, no matter how much they speak about personalization, but there is still some level of impersonalization, right? Because at the end of the day, it's not a human. So does it not bother them?
No, no. In fact, they recognize that it's not human. See,
Oh,
where
okay.
we make mistakes is we want bots to be human. Gen Z doesn't have that trapping. They know it's a robot, and they know that it can only do things that are robotish, if you will. They don't think of it as like, oh yeah, the robot's going to be a human. No, we have that delusion that we want the bots to have empathy and somehow be human-like. They don't have that. They didn't grow up in that world, nor have that expectation of bots. Which gets to actually the next thing on this list is sniffing out communications that are not authentic. They're not trying to get authentic, you know, communications from bots. Now, from people, they are. When you text them and they look you up, they want to know that you're you, that you're really the person that you say you are. And when they ask you a tough question about the culture of a company, that you don't lie, you know, that you tell them the truth. You know, hey, we work 120 hours a week, we're type A personalities, best idea wins, and we don't care about work-life balance. Like, that might not be everyone's culture, but that's the truth. And they want the truth. They want authentic and genuine communications from people. Also, the last two things that I think are very important here is they want to see your cultures. And this is why the visual part is very interesting. Using Pinterest or Snapchat or Instagram or anything that's visual, Facebook, potentially on the visual side, and showing your culture. You're all out at a park, you're having birthday parties, you're, you know, celebrating, you're out drinking, whatever the bit is that's culturally appropriate for your company. They want to see it. They want to actually be able to use their own two eyes and look at it. And here's another thing, and this is in the interview process. They want to see people like them. So college recruiters in particular, bring some of your recent Gen Z recruits to the events so that they see people like them. That's really important for this generation, that they see people that are like them. that they don't see a bunch of gray hairs, they don't see a bunch of millennials, they see people that are like them. Very important, extremely important. All right, next slide. Entrepreneurial, this is really interesting. These are folks that have grown up with YouTubers making millions of dollars and having a career, and so they've grown up with all these different apps making money, and businesses that have kind of grown up, Uber and Lyft and all those types of things. So they're really interested in entrepreneurship, and so that's something as we recruit them, we think about how can we be entrepreneurial with them. How can we think of them not as just a full-time employee doing a job, but also how can we encourage them to be entrepreneurial, because they've grown up in a world of hyper entrepreneurialism, Shark Tank on the TV every day, and so they're very, very aware of entrepreneurship. And I think the last note on this slide is really important as well. They're more accustomed to think about work as gigs, and even talk about it like that in the recruiting process. Like, yeah, this is a cool gig. Like, this gig is, I can do this gig. They're thinking of it like this, and that shouldn't throw us off. Like if they're thinking about it as a gig, and then we provide another gig for them internally, and then another gig internally, and another gig, that's called employment, and it's okay. But they're thinking of it as gigs. We'll lose them if we don't provide them another gig. And so we have to think differently about the gig economy. It's not just recruiting them, but also retaining them. And so we have to think about other gigs that we can put in front of them, which again sounds a lot like internal mobility, but it's phrased differently. Internal mobility is typically taking a position and going laterally or upward to another position. This is really thinking of it as a gig, solving a problem. I'm working on a project, I'm working with a team, I'm doing this gig, and then I want to do another gig. And that's how they think, that's how they talk, that's how they grew up. Next slide. So the lines between home and work and play, life and virtual reality or augmented reality, all those things are completely blurred. And they'll become more blurred the more we get into 5G and 6G technologies, that the lines between gaming and work, and work and play and for-profit work is all blurred for them. More blurred than any of the previous, pretty much the combined generations, because they grew up with the internet. This is that group of folks that grew up on the internet all the time. Again, Henry watches videos about other kids playing videos. If that's not blurred, I'm not sure what is. And that's normal. That's normal. That's not an abnormal thing for a kid at 13. They watch kids that play videos. So they are blurred. We have to stop thinking in traditional senses of here's work, here's play, or here's work and here's life balance. Like they don't look at work-life balance in the same way that historically we have. Next slide. This is not going to come as a shock to anybody, but they want everything personalized to them. So they do believe that they're unique. Well, whether or not we think they're unique or not, but they want things personalized to them. So they want you to understand them, and they want things personalized to them, the experience to be personalized to them, because that's what they've grown up with, is this hyper personalization. It's not a bad thing, by the way. So if this comes across as kind of like, oh my God, this is this is drama, or this is going to be hard, it's actually probably how we should be interacting with all candidates in more of a personalized way. Instead of 1 to 85,000, we should probably think of more about 1 to 1. So the individualization and personalization, hyper-personalization, these aren't bad things, actually. I encourage recruiters to think of this as like, you know what, don't even think about the generation anymore. Just think about how we can do this with all candidates, boomers all the way to Gen Z. How can we make things more personal to that particular candidate? Next slide.
William, an interesting question has come in, just to jump in. How
Good.
do Generation Z view work-life balance?
Well, they don't look at it as work-life balance. They work when they need to work. They relax when they need to relax, and they manage that they're on their own accord. These are kids, again, on the lower end that grew up either playing for 15 minutes on their iPad or for 20 hours. And so they can, like somehow, like I'll tell you a story about dogs. I've had dogs in the past that could self-regulate, meaning you can put down food, and when they're hungry, they eat, and when they're not hungry, they don't eat. I've had 2 dogs that are like that. I've also have 2 dogs right now, they're pit bulls, that cannot regulate. If you put down food, they're going to eat. If you put down more food, they will continue to eat. If you put down a bag of dog food, they will eat the entire thing. So there is no regulation. They don't self-regulate. In the way that these folks look at work-life balance, they look at it in that way of, when I want to work, I'll work. How I want to work is how I want to work. If I want to work, I'll work. When I want to play, I'll play. They look at work-life balance a little bit more fluidly than previous generations. Previous generations want to look at work-life balance as, I get off at 5, I don't do work after that. I'm off on the weekends, I don't do work then. Gen Z does not look at the world that way. And that's going to throw us a little bit, because they're okay, like getting an email at 11 or getting work at 11 o'clock at night. They're not going to freak out about that. It's like, all right, well, cool. But then I'll show up at 11 tomorrow. Like, they'll balance it out in their own kind of natural and normal ways. So they don't look at it in traditional ways, and they're not going to. So forcing them into a false construct of work-life balance, that's an old concept. That's a boomer, Gen X, and potentially even a millennial construct that just doesn't work for Gen Z. So let's talk a little bit about the differences while we have a little bit of time left. So this Gen Z has, again, because of the internet, because of the way that they've grown up, they're highly technical, they're visual, they're independent, they're entrepreneurial. Concentration is more difficult for them, probably because of all these reasons, right? The last 2 points are the points I really want you to take away from this presentation. 2 of the more important points. Millennials on average, again, 23 to 38, have on average 12-second attention span. Gen Z, again, 8 years old to 23 years old, has an 8-second attention span on average. So in the delta of those 2 generations, we've lost 4 seconds of attention span. So just let that settle in as to, like, how does that affect everything? Communications, how does it affect how you interview, the questions you ask, testing, all that stuff? How does it affect you? Because their attention span has changed, and that's not coming back. Next slide. So again, as we said in that kind of the last slide about the physical and digital, they don't see the lines that we have seen historically. They do. Gen Z has superior online research skills. In fact, they're going to make great sourcers and recruiters because of their online skills and stalking, skills. They are looking for connection in the workplace, and so insofar as they want people like them. So it's going to be really important that you hire Gen Z and then put them on the front line. to so that you can attract other great Gen Z candidates. See the person-to-person contact. That's, again, they don't have the soft skills, but it's something that they do like. Kind of like the humanity of it all, because they're used to interacting with all these devices and doing all this digital work. But they also really like the human time when they have it. The last point of them being a bit skeptical kind of gets into some of the fake news stuff that we've seen in the past couple of years, that they are a little bit more skeptical because they've seen a lot of pranks, they've seen a lot of fake stuff on the internet. Next slide. So next slide. So I think the big thing here is they're entering the workforce. Gen Z is, you should experiment quickly. Like, let's not get blindsided by them in the way that we got blindsided by millennials. So personalized experiences for them, have other Gen Z folks be a part of the interview. They talk to them about training and skilling up, flexible work schedules, virtual work, exceptional candidate experience. I want to double highlight that, as they, again, want it individualistic and personalized to them, but they want a great experience because that's what they're accustomed to. And they know what a bad experience looks like because they've been on the internet for 150 years. So they know what bad experience looks like. And next slide. So I think the big thing here is rewarding in a challenging environment. They like games and they like achievement. And so I think one of the things to think about in your work environment is how they get to the next level and what the next level looks like and what achievement and praise looks like, and tying those all together for them, because they're going to want to be challenged in work differently than previous generations. They're going to want to be challenged in work. Next slide. All right, this is just a quote. Go to the next slide. I know we're running over just a little bit. Okay, this is mine, and HackerEarth's going to send you a copy of the presentation. So you'll have all my contact information. I apologize for running a couple minutes too long. You can literally reach out to me in any form that you like. It's got my email all the way to Skype. Happy to help out. I'm steeped in this research between these two generations and always learning something new about these two generations, and I would love to answer any questions either online or offline that you may have. And I want to thank HackerEarth for putting this together again. They're a wonderful company. Please do a demo of their software because it's just really, really cool. And I think it really helps you hire technical talent and vet, whether or not this technical talent really knows what they say they know. And thank you again for today, for the time, and I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, William. Thanks a lot for the webinar. Really insightful presentation. I'm sure the audience enjoyed it, and it was a pleasure hosting you.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Have a great day. And thanks everyone for attending the webinar. I hope you found it of value. I know there were some questions that we could not take. What we'll try and do is address these questions, now, and see if what we can address. If you need a demo of the product, please feel free to reach out to us. We will be sharing the presentation and a recording of the webinar with you, all those who have registered for the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.